There we go. Okay. Well, I'm talking to Dick, my old buddy here, and so what I want to do is get your start with your job under the ship. Am I right? You had a job under the ship. It was a destroyer.
I was on a destroyer.
Yeah.
And
tell us about your job before, and then you had a battle station job, right?
Oh yes.
Okay. Tell us about that. I was
in the after engine room on a destroyer. They've got 2 engine rooms and 2 fire rooms because we had 2 shafts going back and we had twin screws in the back. And our screw was on the port side and the forward engine room had the starboard side. And the shaft run through our compartment to the back and ran the screws. And my job was on the throttle because we had steam turbines back at that time. And the steam would come from the fire room back, and my job would be on the throttle. And when the skipper on the bridge called for so many RPMs on the screw, you opened the valve up just a little bit more, and you got more RPMs. And likewise with the forward engine room. But then when we sounded general quarters.
Now excuse me. Now what would that mean? Sounding general quarters. What does that mean?
That means that you go to a battle station.
Okay. Yeah.
You leave the station where you're at, or any place, even if you're not on a station. You go to what they call your general quarters station. And that's your battle station. And you are there until they said everything is secure, you can go back.
Yeah, so tell us about, so now what alerted you to you got to go to general quarters?
They sounded general quarters. I was in the engine room. They sounded general quarters. And of course you're down below the water level. You got to go up what we call a ladder or stairway, but really it's a ladder. You go straight up and go topside, and I had to go aft toward the fantail, and then down again to get in my battle station.
And that
was underneath a 5-inch gun.
Okay. And were you enclosed underneath that, or
yes.
what? Now, what was over top of you?
A 5-inch gun or turret that rotated around, and I was underneath that gun passing powder up to the gun.
Okay.
And I was on a platform that turned with the gun.
Okay.
They would set powder cans up to me, and it was my job to take them and push them on up through a hole in the bottom of the turret. And then they put them in the chamber of the gun.
So how many people would be in that turret? So
I imagine there would probably be 5 up in the turret, and I was below. And our ammunition was stored down below me yet, under the living quarters.
Okay. Now, what did you see? Okay, say. Had you all experienced a kamikaze attack before?
I'd never experienced one, but I'd seen the damage it did to other ships.
I see.
And of course, when we got the alarm that one was coming in, they sounded general quarters, and we run to our general quarters station, and we began firing immediately.
And was it a group of attack
No,
planes?
it was single. It was a single plane came in, and we was in the islands, and our radar wasn't accurate because it was kind of landlocked. But we knew he was coming in, and we started firing onto him, and rather than hit direct, he hit on the water and exploded right at the hull of the ship.
So now you saw this coming at you? Or?
I didn't. I couldn't see because I was below deck.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was below deck. But the ones at topside could see him coming. And I don't know what they must have been going through their minds to see that plane coming right at them. But I was below the deck, and he hit right along the side of the ship and blew a hole. I bet you could have drove a good Jeep through that hole.
And that was below the water line?
Oh yes, it was right at the, he hit at the water line and then skipped right into us.
Oh, that's,
yeah.
okay.
And he was loaded with bombs and a torpedo. And of course that exploded the minute he hit.
On the water?
Yeah.
And
well, they hit our ship and then they exploded.
Oh.
Yeah. And there was one fellow that was going to his general quarters station, and there was a drinking fountain right outside in the living quarters, and he stopped for a drink of water just as this plane hit, and he was no more. That was the end of him. Yep.
Did the explosives that the plane carry, or did he hit the ship and knock that hole in it, or did the explosives?
I think the explosives did most of it.
Oh, okay.
Because I was standing up on a platform that rotated with the gun above me. And that's when I received shrapnel in my legs, because it was all exposed down below. My top side was pretty well up away from it. But the concussion was just awful.
And did that damaged your hearing then? The concussion?
The concussion. The
Yeah.
concussion.
Yeah.
And then it just seemed like it was more of glass and just debris flying around, and that's what I got in my legs. It's just more glass than anything else. And where they come from, or if they had it in the plane, I don't know.
What else was I going to ask you? Now, how old were you when this happened?
I couldn't have been more than 19 years old, because I graduated from school in the latter part of May, around May, and on October the 30th, no, on Halloween night, I left Fostoria for the Navy. They was having the Halloween parade in Fostoria the night that I left.
Well, tell me about, like, you said you was trapped in there for a while.
Yes.
And
the water came in the minute he hit and made that hole in the side of the ship, and I couldn't go up through the turret.
Right.
Because it was just a small hole
For the,
that to pass powder through. And our projectiles went up a hoist, and it set the timer on the nose of them as they went up. So I didn't have to handle any projectiles. All I handled was the powder. And if you sent them up and it was turning the nose of that projectile as it went up, and you didn't use it, then you had to take a wrench and back it off to zero again and pass it back down into the hole where we had him. But we had a couple of colored boys, they were mess attendants, and they were down below passing this ammunition up, and whatever closed that round hole where they went down in there, I don't know. But anyhow, that hatch closed on them and they were down and didn't get any water down where they were. But they had no communication. They didn't know what was going on above, and they couldn't tell but what maybe we were sinking.
Yeah.
But they knew that that hatch closed down and something was wrong. And no way to talk to them. The electric went off. We had no lights, no nothing. So I stayed there on my platform where I passed that powder for probably 2.5 to 3 hours before the fire controlman came and took bed springs and mattresses and put over that hole and braced it and started pumping the water out again.
So was that water coming up on you?
Oh, it was up to my waist. It was up to my waist.
And did it come up gradually? Is that it? And
it was just all of a sudden.
Okay.
The minute he hit, water was in there.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So you spent a couple hours in there hoping that the water wouldn't come up anymore.
That's right.
Is that it?
That's right. Yep. I didn't know if they was going to be able to save the ship or not.
Yeah.
And of course, every man had their job.
Yeah.
So they started pumping our oil and stuff over to the opposite side of the ship to get that hole lifted up high enough that it wasn't coming in anymore.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah. That's the way they saved it.
Yeah. So how long did you have to wonder whether you were going to be a safe guy again for the next day or not?
Probably that 2.5 hours that I was in that water, because I could see what was going on outside of my compartment. But they worked as fast as they could to get that ship listed over to the other side.
I see.
And got the water pumped out. Then I could get down off the platform and get out of there. And I went topside, and by that time the Abner Reed was another destroyer just like ours. They came along to assist us. And here came another Kamikaze and hit them right between their boiler rooms, and it exploded and sank.
Wow.
And it was up to the men that was topside on guns to go down and pick up survivors and drag them onto our ship. And there was about 160 of those fellas that we saved out of a crew of 300.
Oh, wow.
We had 300 men and about 15 officers when we were underway. And they picked up about 165 out of 300 men.
Out of the Abner Reed?
Off the Abner Reed.
Yeah.
It was a ship just like ours, but from another squadron. It wasn't in our squadron.
So they took took the brunt, or took a bigger piece of destruction than you.
They sure did. They sure did.
And
they lost their ship plus pretty half of their men.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, how did you, if as a 19-year-old, how did you look at all that? How did it make you feel, you know, when you...
I believe when you're 19 years old, you're full of fight and vinegar, just, you don't really care. You was out there to do your job and to fight. And I believe you get just as scared as you would if you was an older person. I don't know when I was scared any worse than I was that morning. And that was about 10 o'clock in the morning when they hit us. But no, it just don't, when you're young like that, it don't affect you as bad, I don't believe.
So a lot of times in the old films and stuff, you'll see like lots of kamikaze planes attacking ships, but in those cases, it was just one on each one, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they only sent just that one plane in, and we heard later that they only had enough fuel to make a one-way trip.
Right.
If they didn't hit, they didn't have enough fuel to return.
Yeah.
They had to hit something.
And how late in the Pacific campaign was that? Was that later on when?
That was November the 1st of 1944.
So, and how much experience had you had aboard the ship before that happened? How experienced were you?
I had hardly any experience because when I went on the Claxton, It was in a floating dye dock at Mare Island, which is in Vallejo, California. And it wasn't ready to sail yet. So the skipper sent me home on a short leave. And while I was home on leave, they got orders to come out of the dry dock and start sailing. So they went down to Manus in New Guinea. And when I came back, the only thing left was my sea bag sitting on the dock. So I had to get on the Willard A. Holbrook, which was a troop transport, and go down there and catch them. And the minute that I got the destroyer, they was forming a squadron or a group of ships, battleships and cruisers for the invasion of Leyte in the Philippine Islands. And that was the first experience I had then. We went in the invasion, went through an awful typhoon storm going into the invasion of Leyte, and that was my first experience. And I never knew what a kamikaze was until we got hit on the first day of November. Yeah, never knew.
Well, so, okay, when you signed up to go, what were your feelings at the time, you know?
You mean to go in the Navy?
Yeah, yeah.
My dad was in World War I in the Army, and he often told me that he laid out in Belgium on the fields and ate raw turnips for 3 days and 3 nights. So when I was drafted and had to go to service, I didn't want any part of the Army. I thought I'd go to the Navy. And living on a farm, I didn't have the advantage of going swimming or anything like that other than in a horse trough. So I took the Navy regardless. And that was the outcome. It was when you went to Great Lakes, they taught you to swim.
Yeah.
Yep, they taught you to swim. And I had 6 weeks of training in Great Lakes to run lathes, turret machines, milling machines, and that was a very short course. It only lasted 6 weeks. And from there I went to Shoemaker, California, which I guess is no more, and there they send you to a base or a ship, and that's when I went to Vallejo, California, to Mare Island, and went aboard the USS Claxton.
Can you talk more about your ship? How do you spell that exactly?
USS Claxton, DD 571, and that DD stands for Destroyer Division. And the 571 is the order in which your ship was built. And the other ships in our squadron was numbered right on down the line.
Right.
We had a 569, which was the Converse, and then the 572 was the Aulic, 573 was the Osborne, and that's the way we went. But it was by the way the ships were manufactured, and it just seemed like at that time they was rolling them off like off of an assembly line to do with cars.
When you got to thinking about it later on and everything, what was your feelings about the Japanese with the kamikaze thing? You know, kind of they're looking at things a little bit different than, say, American customs, the suicide planes and stuff like that. It's like a suicide bomber, you know.
From then on, I had no use for them. I had no use for them, and it is stuck in my system ever since. I judge every one of Oriental descent the same. They're probably as good a person as you and I, but I've got that feeling that I just have no love for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I've run across a lot of them since, and it just seems like you get out of their way. They've got priority, and they're better than what we are.
Mm-hmm. Well, what, like after the attack and everything, and that engagement, what did you and your friends say about things? What did you guys say? You was lucky that he didn't do more damage to your ship, or what were you guys talking about after that?
There wasn't a whole lot of talk from then on. They sent us down in New Guinea into a floating dry dock to be repaired, and we went in this floating dry dock with the cruiser Canberra and another destroyer, and that was mind-boggling to think they could put a cruiser and 2 destroyers in the same dry dock and float out on the water. Because there was an awful lot of weight in that dry dock. And it all came about by air chambers on the side that kept you afloat. But there wasn't much talk. There's more talk now when we have our yearly reunions.
Yeah.
We come back together and we talk about what we've gone through. But at the time there was very little talk about it. And we see other ships out there that were damaged much worse than what we were.
Right.
And how lucky we were to go through it.
And how was when you guys talk now and that, what's your feelings about that, or
Well, we feel that we won the war. But when you look back, we thought that was the war to end all wars.
Yeah.
But it wasn't. It wasn't. We're still fighting. And I don't know. Everyone has got their own judgment onto it. But sometimes I think it's a political thing. It's just a way to keep your economy going. I really do. And another thing that my dad always told me, and I don't know why he did, but this was way back in the 30s. He says, watch out for China. Watch out for China. And I believe there was a lot of truth in it.
What would you do? You said, didn't you go to Texas or something? Didn't you go to some kind of a reunion for your ship? Or
we have a reunion every year, but it's a different place in the United States.
I see.
We go to our reunion. We have a banquet on Saturday night. We meet on a Sunday morning and decide where we're going to go for our next reunion.
I see.
And usually there's someone in a city that is large enough to hold a reunion and has something there of excitement to take us around and show there's what they have in their city.
I see.
One year we went to Seattle, Washington, and then we're invited to take a cruise and go on up to Alaska. And we did that. But we've been to, I think the first reunion I ever attended was in Chicago. But we've been to Philadelphia, New York, Boston. We just go all over.
You also said that you didn't talk about your experiences with your children. You want to just say why or how that came about, and then how they finally heard your story?
It seems like the fellows that's been in the service have returned and they don't tell what they went through because it sounds like you're bragging. But we really aren't, so we don't talk about it. And my children never heard what I went through. I received a Purple Heart when I got the shrapnel in my legs, and I never talked about it. I assumed that they knew that I received it, but I never talked about what happened to me, and I was chosen to be a Veteran of the Year here in Findlay, and they had a program down at the DAV, which was an organization of veterans here in town, and by that time they had hunted up my history, what I'd gone through, and my children were there at this program, and they heard it, and from then on they've kind of assumed that they knew what I had went through in life and took a different outlook.
Oh, yeah? Okay. Well, that's good. Anyway, I can't think of too much more to ask you, but it strikes you, it was, your ship was probably full of young people, right?
We were. We had some that were regular Navy, which had been aboard other ships, and then transferred over to the USS Claxton when it was commissioned. And you kind of looked up to those boys because they had more experience than what you did. They had been on other ships, had never been in a kamikaze attack like we were, but they had the experience of running the ship. And you looked up to those fellows, and they taught you an awful lot as far as in the engine room, what pumps fed this steam that came into our turbines was condensed, went down through and fed back through a feed pump to the boiler room and made back into steam. Water was very scarce once we took the salt out of it to keep using it over and over. So once it went through our turbines, we condensed it and fed it back to the fire room, and they made steam out of it again.
So did you have, when you entered, did you have some mechanical experience from being on?
Very little.
Oh, yeah?
I went out, I lived at Alveda and went through the Fostoria draft board, and the boys from Fostoria, they went with me, and they all had experience in machine shops over there. Well, I came off a farm. I didn't know anything about a lathe or a milling machine. I could run a manure spreader, but that's the only experience I had. But it didn't do me any good. So when I went to basic engineering school up at Great Lakes, I really didn't know what those machines did. I had to learn that, and they already knew it. So,
but you took to that pretty quick then?
Yes.
Yes. You thought you ended up being that that was your thing, am I right?
That's right.
Yeah.
You went in as an apprentice seaman, and you worked your way up either first in a fireman or a seaman. Well, I was a fireman in the engineers division, and you stayed there. You didn't jump back and forth from one department to another. Once you was a machinist mate, you stayed there.
So you liked what you did?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. Well, you want to talk about that?
It was quite an experience. Ours was mostly if a valve was scored by steam pressure, you learned how to put it in a lathe or milling machine and put a new face onto it, and put it back online, and took asbestos, which was a dry powder, put in a 5-gallon bucket, put water with it, mix it up into a slurry, and pack onto that valve, and then wrap it with tape. Of course, you had the chicken wire netting in that slurry too as you packed it on this valve. And then you wrapped it, and you got it good and smooth. Then we painted it. Painted it white, blended right into their steam lines. But yeah, I got experience of resurfacing a valve, the face of them, and putting in packing in a packing land. And,
so that helped you when you came back from the war then, or as far as?
I thought it would, but then when I had enough points to get out of the service after I returned, a lot of the older men were married and had points and got out ahead of me. But they already had been back and got jobs, and when I had enough points to get out, there was hardly any jobs left. So I was fortunate enough to go to Hancock Hybrids and work out there in the seed corn business. Because we raised hybrid seed corn, which more or less was in my line.
Yeah.
Because I'd always been on the farm,
Yeah.
and I enjoyed farming. So I worked with hybrid seed corn, certified soybeans and wheat and oats, and that was more my line. And our establishment was in an old dairy barn on East Sandusky Street, and it was just hay mows in there. So I took it upon myself to make stairways from one hay loft to the other hay loft, so we could go up a stairway rather than climbing the ladder. And from that, I was chosen to work for a contractor to do carpenter work. And that's where I went from there and stayed. Stayed with the contractor until I thought I better be getting into something that had some benefits with health insurance, retirement, a vacation, and things like that. So I had the opportunity to go to Marathon Oil, put my application in, and I got a job in the carpenter shop. And that's where I retired from.
Well, I think that's about it, unless you have anything else you'd like to say about the war experiences, you know, a young guy fighting for the country and stuff like that. Or?
Well, I've got a grandson that's in the Navy right now. And he's aboard ship down in Norfolk. He's on a LPD. They're about the same size as a destroyer, only they have different armament, more different types of guns, but he's on there as an electrician's mate. And I hope that he sticks with it, and when he comes home, he's got an electrical experience behind him.
Yeah.
And he called me the other day after this storm and asked how he was doing, and he says around the 8th of July, he'll be going to the Great Lakes to a school on troubleshooting and things that happen with electricity. And I think that'll be a great experience for him.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot, Dick. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it.
Okay.